pastor in Tucson. And I think the last great revival was the Jesus movement. Amen? So when we got started at the vineyard and all the hippies, which were usually baby boomers, were coming to the Lord, they'd kind of fallen out of the garden and had a lot of problems. And so we were a very therapeutic community. And one of the things we did is we put people in small groups. And early on in one of the small groups, we had, I think there were 4 women in this group. They were sharing, and one of the women kind of said, last year I had an abortion. And everybody was quiet for a minute. And then another woman said, last year I had an abortion. And another one said, last year I had an abortion. So that was kind of our introduction into that we had an issue in terms of abortion. And we began to discuss it. My wife at the time, my ex-wife now, was interested in being a midwife, so she decided that she would volunteer in a crisis pregnancy center. But we didn't have a Protestant crisis pregnancy center. What we had was a Catholic crisis pregnancy center called Reach Out. And so she volunteered in 1973 in that crisis pregnancy center, and we kind of got our introduction to the issues of right to life, and started to discuss it with the gals that had abortions and begin to see the issues. So that was our beginning. So Lori Giovanini, Lori, where are you?
I'm right here.
Hi, Lori. Lori's actually a friend of mine, but she's the director right now for Reach Out. So would you give her a hand? So the Catholic community has had the longevity with crisis pregnancy stuff here. Yeah. And then I also wanted to acknowledge Peg Harmon. Peg, would you stand? Peg is head of Catholic Social Services and really oversees so many of the services here. And I've been introduced to a lot of the service in our community through Peg. She's been a good friend and knows a lot more in a lot of areas in terms of community development than I do. So we have a big hand for Peg. Crisis Pregnancy Center. Jerry and I were talking this morning. He says, don't forget to mention Dr. Francis Schaeffer and C. Everett Koop in the film series. And Jerry and Ralph and my present wife were really the founders of Crisis Pregnancy Center. And out of the film series, we begin to say, as Protestants, we need to do something. So they put together the Crisis Pregnancy Center. It started in the vineyard, one of the halfway houses. As hippies, we had halfway houses because church would not do it. You could not see stable conversions out of church. It just did not work. So we had to have halfway houses, which was a part of the hippie movement, in order for that to happen. That's where the first CPC started. So, Jerry, raise your hand. Jerry's here today and really one of the founders and key people in putting that together. And he wanted me to mention that Jenny Clemens was the president of Right to Life during that time, and it was part of our collaboration. Jim, raise your hand, with E-Free. Jenny was up at E-Free, so we had all kinds of collaborations, and Ralph was actually at E-Free at the time too, so there was all kinds of collaboration that came together. John Tabor showed up a little later in the community, and we all fell in love with him because he was a great guy, and he was doing fundraising in another organization at that point in time, and I was running renewal counseling, and we would get together and we'd think, boy, we'd love to have John Tabor in our organization. But we ended up having him come in and become the director of the Crisis Pregnancy Center, and as most of you know, he's just done a fabulous job over the years, really seeing the increase in terms of the CPC's influence, the penetration, some of the things that have happened here. He'll tell you about it, but we are one of the really significant and influential crisis pregnancy centers in the nation. And John's had a tremendous influence. He's a man of God. He's a man of power and influence. I love him. He's a funny little guy. My wife says he has fur on his teeth, on his feet, not his teeth. Kind of looks like he has fur on his teeth, but it really So one of the things that I've seen that he's done in working with the Catholic community on the right to life marches, he's done just a tremendous job in collaboration in so many areas, and he's been a great friend to me. So I want to introduce to you John Tabor. Can we have a big hand for him? So you can see that he doesn't have fur on his teeth.
One thing is, I'll always look up to Randy. Well, the facts are I do have fur on my feet. My wife loves it, you know, at night it's warm. I'm really tickled to be here, and I'm quite privileged to be here. And will the old guys move up front? I tell you what, I can actually hold this. Is that better? All right. Well, I'm just pleased as can be to be here. I love joking around, but believe me, there is a serious side to me. People don't see it very often, but it's the truth. When I first got here, there weren't very many people, and I was saying, this is my thought. Everybody thinks they know about the Crisis Pregnancy Center and what we do, and so they don't need to come here at Tabor. And the facts are, I'm not going to talk about the Crisis Pregnancy Center very much. I'm going to talk about Sanctity of Human Life. But before I do, I want to be on record, and I've said this everywhere I've gone. Thanks to Reach Out and to the Catholic community. Because without what the Catholic community has done on this issue of the sanctity of human life, we would be nowhere. And shame on us as Protestants for not recognizing and attacking this issue like the Catholic community has. Story. A gentleman by the name of Kelly Copeland in town who's very close with the Knights of Columbus, great Catholic man. And I have friends, and we talk about issues related to the sanctity of human life often. We formed a group called SALTS, the Southern Arizona Life Team, and it was our attempt to bring the evangelical community and the Catholic community together. Well, what happened is what typically happens, to our shame, for all of those of you who are evangelicals, is whenever there was a SALT meeting, it was the Catholic community and me. Because the evangelicals would not turn up, right? Well, it just so happened at that time that we were rethinking what we were going to do with our Walk for Life, which is a fundraising deal for us. And we decided that we were going to move into another campaign in lieu of the Walk for Life. And so I was at a SALT meeting, and I stood up and I said, what we would like to do, Crisis Pregnancy Centers, is we would like to redirect our work and our effort away from the Walk for Life to the March for Life and join you in that march. Well, the whole place stood up and applauded. And that was the first time I really understood how desirous the Catholic community has been that there would be a true partnership in this town. And we've been working to that end ever since. And so I encourage all of you to join us on the March for Life, which is always on Sanctity of Life, Saturday before the Sunday. And it's the recognition of Roe versus Wade, and our march in hopes and with all the prayers that we can muster, that this will be the last year of legalized abortion in the United States. Let me just briefly tell you who we are, and then I want to get on to my comments. Our mission for the Crisis Pregnancy Centers is that we are a Christ-centered ministry promoting culture of life by protecting the unborn, ministering to those facing crisis pregnancies, teaching biblical sexuality, and fostering emotional healing. That's pretty broad, but it encompasses everything that we do because we do a lot. And individually, if you'd like to ask about specific programs, I'd be glad to answer you. Our central ministry focus is to develop, empower, and release our staff and all those that we work with to be life givers. Being life givers is what I'm going to talk about mostly this afternoon. Our guiding principles are that we're Christ-centered, we're word-based and spirit-empowered, we're grace-filled, culturally aware, we believe in excellence in everything that we do, and we try hard for that. Moral integrity, unity, and we're team-led and driven, and that's all coming together. This is our sandbox that I'm describing for you. Our culture is that we want to be healthy people who love and follow God, experience and extend His grace and hope, model life-giving relationships, and biblical sexuality. We also want to be an organization that leaves a godly legacy. So that's who we are. And if you're these things, we want you in our sandbox. We want to play with you because together we are a lot stronger than we are separately. And I'm so excited about this the new forward look. At the CPC, there's no reverse gear and there's no neutral. So if we're not moving forward, and if your organization's not moving forward, folks, you're in a world of hurt. Because the world's going to leave you behind. And that's something. I never thought of it before, but neutral's not good enough. And we all as organizations can very easily slip into neutral. Not necessarily go in reverse, but we can do that easily too. Happy Father's Day, by the way, to all you guys. And women, we don't want barbecues on Father's Day. We want you to take us out and give us a rose. I'm speaking for every man here. We're tired of doing these barbecues for our own day. That's going to be the biggest applause line of the whole afternoon. I just came back from Mexico, and we, as part of a team from a group called Life International in Grand Rapids, Michigan, we have what we call church leadership training. And could you bring my drink up? This is really funny because I speak a lot. And only with the most important audiences. This is the honest truth. Does my mouth turn to cotton? And this is one. See, I value you people so much. This is really true. I'm serious. This is really important because we make up the body of Christ, and as we go, so goes this community. So we were in Mexico and we were teaching in Nogales. How many people were? About 150. 100. Okay, let's say 130 pastors and church leaders about the sanctity of human life and about biblical sexuality. And the pastor, Pastor Roberto Morales, who is the pastor of First Baptist Church there, told us this is the first time in his 40-year career that he had ever heard any teaching on the sanctity of human life or biblical sexuality. We find that in every nation that we go into. CPC, our CPCs in Cambodia, we're working to start some work in Ethiopia, we have work in Kenya, we've done trainings all over the world, and every place we've been, they tell us that they've not heard about the sanctity of human life. Never. Never. And I would bet that right here in Tucson, Arizona, our pastors haven't either. I mean, they know some things, but they don't know all that they need, nor are they as motivated as we all should be. And shame on us again. The most fundamental principle in all of our faith is the sanctity of human life. Why? Because it was God who did it. It's God who wanted us. It's God who created us. It's God who uses us. What could be more fundamental than that? Nothing in my book. Everything stems from our laws, our protections, from this idea that life is precious. So when we go and we teach about this, we are a very affluent community here by comparison. In many other communities, they don't have as many plan B, C, D, and E's as we have. They have plan A. And their plan A is, how am I going to get through today? What am I going to do about tomorrow? And almost all the time in the Christian community, it's all Christ. It's Jesus. So you can go into the worst section of Nairobi, which has the largest slum area in the world, and they can be starving, and you can say, if they're Christians, do you want to hear about Jesus or do you want food? And guess what they pick? Jesus. All the time, every time. Oh, if we could ever be that way here. And as pastors, you know, gee, if only our flocks would be as attentive and interested as they are in third world countries or other countries other than the West. Wouldn't that be something? And you know, that's my constant prayer, is that our people that we work with day in and day out in the church community would be just like that. And there are some. We have some leading lights in this town, but we don't have enough. We don't have that 1,000 lights or points of light that which president was that did that? Yeah. we have 5 points of light, maybe. So we're down there and we're doing Journey of a Life Giver, which is this manual right here. And I can tell you folks, just like this happened in Kenya and other parts of the world, this training is changing entire countries. Whether they do it, whether they train the way we do, or change it into a rally and do it on a story-based platform, it is changing countries because they're thinking of things in different ways. In Kenya, the pastors are realizing that they can't beat their wives, even though that's what the wives desire, because that's what the culture has taught them. And the Maasai are realizing that they can't have multiple wives, even though that's what their culture has told them that they need to do. And so when we're teaching about the sanctity of human life and God's heart and prayer for people, the Maasai, if they have multiple wives, they want to chuck 3 or 4 of them and all the kids and just keep their favorite. And so the problem is a lot different. So we have to say, no, that's not God's heart. Hey, buddy, you made your bed, you're going to lay it with 3 or 4 or 5. But you're going to teach your sons. That was a funny thing to say. But I mean, but they have to teach their sons. And when the son goes into 14 and they have to go out and kill their own animal, which they still do, when they come back with their dead lion or cheetah or whatever it happens to be, all of the single girls descend on them for sex. That's part of their culture. That's part of their right of manhood. So we have to teach these young men, hey, no, not until you're married, brother. And you know what? The young people are heeding the advice, and you know why? Because they finally understand what God's heart is regarding that particular issue. So everything that we do in this training and as an organization is really based on John 10:10. The enemy comes to seek, kill, and destroy. I get that mixed up, the order. But I have come to give you life and to give it to you abundantly. And so how do you give life abundantly? Well, this is what we found out. We talked about being a life giver versus being a life taker. A life giver is someone who sacrifices self for the good of the other person. That's a life giver. A life taker is someone who sacrifices the other person for the good of self. And it's, I read something the other day, it says, where is this? It starts in the morning. Well, it starts in the morning and goes throughout the day. And isn't it strange that marriage is the only place where enemies sleep in the same bed? See, that's a life-taking marriage arrangement. But we all live it a lot. And instead, we need to be life givers. From the very time that we open our eyes to the very time that we close our eyes at night, how can we be life givers Well, part of being a life giver is not just person to person, that kind of relationship, but it's organization to organization. And it's denomination to denomination. We cannot continue to be life takers and build ourselves up at the expense of other people. So Catholic Church, you can't do that to us. And evangelicals, you can't do it to the Catholics. We have to be open-handed. There's a saying that says, we own nothing, we control nothing, and we count nothing as our own. That is the philosophy that we need to live by here in Tucson. We own nothing, we control nothing, and we count nothing as our own. Open-fisted with everybody that we interact with. Right, Randy? That's the way we need to be. So being a life taker is, for a selfish reason, taking advantage of the other person. Being a life giver is sacrificing ourselves for the other person. And that's what we're trying to do at the Crisis Pregnancy Center. That's what I see Reach Out trying to do. That's what I see a number of organizations in town trying to do. But the world is against us. And oftentimes the church, meaning capital C, our culture, the church culture, works against us in that way too. And so we just have to fight the good fight. We have to keep marching forward and doing everything that we need to do. Randy says something. He has a couple of quotes that I just absolutely love. And when he's talking about justice, he says that for most churches, it's spelled J-U-S-T, U-S. Isn't that true? Yeah, it's just us. That's what we think of first. Now, is that being a life giver or a life taker? Yeah, it's being a life taker. And then he says something else, which I just heard on a tape, a presentation he made at your church, Jim. He talks about grace. You can't have grace without it being absolutely covered in blood. And that's Jesus' blood. So how can we be life takers and talk a good game about grace? We're talking out of both sides of our mouths, right? It's got to change. It absolutely has to change. And I'll tell you, for one, Crisis Pregnancy Centers, we are interested in, I read you our mission, our guiding principles, our culture, and our daily ministry focus. We're interested in anybody that wants to have an open hand, partner with us for the betterment of not only our ministry, but also for the betterment of the entire community. And we've been doing that now we're 31 years old, and we've been doing it for many decades now. We really are trying to work within the community. It's not just our mission. That is really important. That's what God has called us to. But how influential can we be? How influential can all of your organizations be if they adopt that kind of stance? So I'm really trying to rally the community to be life givers and to not be so doggone focused on yourself. It drives me nuts. It drives me nuts. In the prayer leading up to our time of eating, we talked about being doers. And I thought of, was it James 1:22? It says, don't just be hearers of the word, be doers of the word too. So I really challenge you all. We need to be doers. We need to know what God asks of us. We need to understand it, and we need to move forward and do it. Bonhoeffer has a quote. A partial part of it is, not to speak is to speak. Not to act is to act. So we've got to unzip our mouths. We've got to unzip our selfishness, our everything that's all about ourselves, and we've got to go out to others. One of the ways that we have done that, and we're going to have a chance to see this a little bit later, see a movie, a preliminary preview of a movie that's being produced here in town. It's called It's a Girl, movie.com if you want to go see it on the web. It's a Girl. And that's a collaborative effort on the part of ourselves and others who've come together to talk about, well, you'll see what the issue is. Can I say it, Jim? It's about gendercide and the killing of baby girls. I can't think of anything worse than the way that we take advantage of women, men. And it includes gendercide. And Jim's going to show that video here in just a second. And then the other thing is we're working with a young man by the name of Garrett Muldrum, who's starting off and doing a new business called Made of Love Films, who's really interested in working within this community, within the faith community in particular. And we're always looking for different people, different ideas, different organizations where we can partner up and move this ball forward and be examples to other people. And so I give you all permission, if you ever catch us at the CBC, not being what I'm talking about today, please hit me between the eyes. Because I need an awakening every once in a while ourselves. Organizations are no different than people. We can slumber, or we can take a nap, and we just hope it's not permanent. It goes forever. So it's been a pleasure to talk with you. Sanctity of human life is so much broader than the abortion issue. The abortion is the fulcrum or the tipping point, and everything worse happens from that, and just about everything that can happen is happening. Grinding up babies for pills that allow men to have extra vigor. I mean, come on. But stuff like that's happening. So we just have to be watchmen on the wall, and each of us has a role to play. So, Jim, you want to play this? And then I'll hang around afterwards and answer any questions, but you know what? It's been a real privilege. I don't often get an opportunity to talk about being a life giver as opposed to a life taker. And my prayer is that today, as you leave, you won't be yelling at each other because one car got in front of the other. And then when you go home, that you'll be an absolute life giver to your family and your spouse, and that will just start a pattern that will continue with you forever. Thanks again for that.